In the ruthless deserts of the American Wild West, one angry cowboy rides with nothing left to lose. When fate throws two brave Apache sisters into his path, a violent rescue turns into a journey of honor, courage, and unexpected compassion. This is not just a story of survival. It's a story of a broken man finding his heart again. Like, share and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Now, let's get started. The desert of the American Wild West stretched endlessly, its golden sand burning under the harsh afternoon sun. Jake Holloway rode through it alone, his face hard and eyes shadowed by years of loss. Once, he had owned a ranch, a small piece of land he called home. But greed and violence had taken everything from him. Now anger was his only companion. The creak of his saddle and the slow steps of his horse were the only sounds breaking the silence. Jake wasn't looking for trouble, yet trouble had a way of finding men like him. Every mile he rode felt heavier, as if the land itself remembered his pain. Jake's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden sound carried by the wind. Shouts, sharp and cruel, followed by desperate cries. He reined his horse to a stop, listening carefully. The desert usually swallowed noise, but this was different. His jaw tightened as he turned toward the sound, instinct guiding him more than reason. He told himself to ride away, to mind his own business, but his hands moved on their own. Spurs kicked lightly, and the horse changed direction. Anger boiled again in his chest, the same anger that had driven him across these lands since the day he lost everything. As Jake crested a low ridge, the scene below made his blood burn. Two Apache women were trapped near a dry canyon, their backs against the rocks. Three bounty hunters circled them like wolves, laughing as they closed in. The women were dusty and exhausted, yet they stood tall, refusing to beg. Jake could see fear in their eyes, but also defiance. Memories of injustice flooded his mindmen with guns, taking what they wanted because they could. Without stopping to plan, Jake urged his horse forward, the thunder of hooves announcing his arrival. The bounty hunters turned too late. Jake's revolver was already in his hand, his movements sharp and practiced. He fired once into the air, the sound cracking across the desert like lightning. "Back away," he shouted, his voice rough with fury. One man laughed and raised his gun, but Jake didn't hesitate. A second shot knocked the weapon from the man's hand, sending him stumbling. The other two froze, suddenly, unsure. They hadn't expected resistance, especially not from a lone cowboy who looked like he had nothing left to lose. The standoff lasted only moments. Jake's eyes were cold, his aim steady, and the hunters saw it. One by one, they backed away, muttering curses as they mounted their horses and rode off, dust rising behind them. Silence returned, broken only by the wind. Jake lowered his gun slowly and turned to the women. Up close, he saw they were young, perhaps in their early 20s, their dark hair tangled by the desert wind. They studied him carefully, unsure whether he was truly a savior or just another danger. Jake spoke first, his tone softer than he expected. He offered them water, pulling a canteen from his saddle. After a brief pause, one woman stepped forward and accepted it, nodding in thanks. Her name was Ayanna, she said quietly, and the other was her sister, Nita. Their English was careful but clear. They explained they had been traveling to meet their people when the hunters found them. Jake listened without interrupting, surprised by the calm strength in their voices despite what they had faced. He knew the smart thing would be to leave them once the danger passed. The Wild West was no place for attachments, especially for a man carrying as much anger as he did. Yet as he looked at the empty desert stretching in every direction, he knew abandoning them would be a death sentence. The sun was already lowering, and night in the desert could be just as cruel as day. With a sigh, Jake told them he knew of an old trail that led to a safer route. He didn't explain why he was helping. He barely understood it himself. They began walking together, the horse moving slowly so the women could keep pace. The sky shifted from blazing gold to deep orange, and long shadows stretched across the sand. Jake felt something unfamiliar stirring inside him, an unease mixed with purpose. He noticed how Ayanna helped her sister when the path grew rough, how Nita still watched the horizon carefully, alert for danger. These women had survived more than he knew, and their resilience chipped away at the walls he had built around his heart. As dusk settled, Jake realized this rescue had already changed something within him. The anger was still there, heavy and dark, but beneath it was a feeling he hadn't felt in years, a sense of responsibility. He didn't know where this path would lead, or what trouble waited ahead. But for the first time since losing his ranch, he wasn't riding alone just to escape his past. He was moving toward something, even if he couldn't yet name it. Night fell quickly over the desert, wrapping the land in deep blue shadows and cold air. Jake guided the horse toward a cluster of rocks where an old, forgotten camp once stood. The women followed closely, their steps slow but steady after the long day. Jake gathered dry brush and struck a small fire, careful to keep the flames low. As the fire crackled, the desert seemed less threatening, though danger still lingered beyond the circle of light. Jake remained alert, his hand never far from his gun, while the women warmed themselves in silence. After a while, Ayanna broke the quiet. She thanked Jake again, her voice calm but sincere. Nita added a few words of gratitude, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Jake nodded, unsure how to respond to kindness after so many years without it. He handed them some dried meat and hard bread from his saddlebag. It wasn't much, but they accepted it gratefully. Eating together felt strangely intimate, like a reminder of simpler times Jake thought were gone forever. As the fire burned lower, the women began to share their story. They spoke of their village, of elders who taught them respect for the land and the spirits, and of the violence that had pushed them onto dangerous roads. Jake listened quietly, staring into the flames. He realized their pain mirrored his own loss, even if the details were different. The Wild West had a way of taking from everyone, no matter where they came from. For the first time in years, Jake felt understood without having to explain himself. The wind shifted, carrying distant sounds across the sand. Jake's muscles tensed instantly. He stood and scanned the darkness, his senses sharp. Hoofbeats echoed faintly, then faded. Whether it was imagination or real danger, he didn't know, but the moment reminded him of how fragile safety was. Without a word, he positioned himself between the women and the open desert. The act felt natural, almost automatic, as if protecting them had become his purpose for the night. Ayana watched him closely, noticing the way his anger seemed to change when he was focused on their safety. She spoke softly, saying that courage wasn't always loud or violent. Jake felt the words settle deep inside him. He had always believed strength came from fear and force, but here, standing under the endless stars, he began to question that belief. The fire popped, sending sparks into the sky like brief shooting stars. Later, as the women rested near the rocks, Jake stayed awake. He thought about the ranch he lost, the friends who betrayed him, and the bitterness that had driven him across the desert. Helping these women hadn't erased that pain, but it had given it a new shape. Instead of rage pushing him forward, there was now responsibility pulling him ahead. The difference felt small, yet powerful. Like the first drop of rain before a storm breaks, near dawn, the sky slowly lightened and the cold eased. The desert revealed its quiet beauty, soft colors spreading across the horizon. Ayana and Nita rose, ready to continue their journey. Jake offered to escort them farther, to a place where they would be safer. They accepted with gentle smiles, trust slowly forming between them. Mounting his horse, Jake felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. As they moved forward together, Jake understood that the rescue had never been one-sided. Saving Ayana and Nita had forced him to face the man he had become and the man he still could be. In a land ruled by violence and survival, he had found a reason to care again. The Wild West remained harsh and unforgiving, but as the sun rose behind them, Jake rode on, knowing his heart was no longer as empty as the desert he once wandered alone.